Hi everyone, this is Veronica and welcome back to my studio. Today in the Dear Jane quilt, we are going to be working on block K-2, also called Grandpa's Chickens. Now this block is actually a pretty simple one. It's just going to be tedious because we've got a lot of little pieces and they're pretty small. So when we take a closer look at this block, you can see that it is just a checkerboard pattern. When I went through and I counted all of these, we need 18 of the main color for our squares, and we need 18 little squares of our background fabric. I'm not going to be cutting each individual square for this particular block. I'm going to do some strip piecing. When I measured these squares, they measured out to be 5 1/8 inch square. So I need to have my squares to be the size of 1 1/8 inch square. So what I'm going to do is actually cut 3 strips of each color. So I will have 3 strips of my main color fabric, and it's going to measure 1 1/8 by 6 6/8. So that will give me all the squares that I need once we subcut it. And then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to cut 3 strips out of my background fabric, and they are going to be 1 1/8 by 6 6/8. Let me show you the fabric I'm using today. Today for my main fabric, I am going to be using this pretty little purple fabric. And for my background, I'm going to be using this muslin fabric. Before I get started cutting my fabric, I wanted to explain a little bit more something that I'm going to be doing. The idea is for these little squares that I would be, it's easier to show you over here because it's already in colors, but I would be having a strip all the way down of the background, which is my muslin, and a strip of the foundation fabric. When I cut 3 of my strips, then I would end up with 1, 2, 3, alternating with 1, 2, 3 of my foundation fabric. You can do it this way when your print isn't all over print. If we look at my fabric that I've chosen, it's not directional, it doesn't have a big design, it's just an all over print. The reason that's important is because what I'm going to be doing when I start subcutting is I'll have these 3 strips, and then I will cut them and take one strip and completely reverse it. So even though they'll all be sewn and they'll look like muslin color, muslin color, muslin color, when I take that second one, that second row, I'm going to flip it around so then it would be alternating and make that checkerboard. If you have a fabric that is directional or has a particular pattern that needs to be in a certain direction, then you're going to have to alter your pattern just a little bit. Instead of cutting 3 strips of each fabric at 6 6/8 of an inch long, you will need to cut 6 strips of each fabric at 3 3/8 of an inch long. And that way you can sew muslin and the first row, she'll sew those 3 strips, muslin color, muslin color, muslin color, and then the next 3 you would sew together as a muslin, you'd sew them together as a color, muslin, color, muslin, color, muslin. Then you'd cut those apart and make sure you plug them in where they need to go. I hope that makes sense. I'm not going to be doing it in that way just because of the fabric that I've chosen. But if I didn't make that clear, you can always comment or send me an email and I will try to clarify at another time. So first, let's go ahead and get my fabric cut. Here are my 3 strips cut from each of the fabrics, the foundation fabric and the background fabric. And you were probably trying to correct me in my last little clip that the length of these strips, yes, they are 6 6/8 of an inch, but we always convert that in math, so that's 6 3/4. So that'll be easier for you to understand and remember and cut. So these are all 3 6 3/4 of an inch long and 1 1/8 of an inch wide. Now I'm going to set these up so that I will be able to sew them. So I'll have my muslin foundation in that pattern. So this is the way that I'm going to be sewing them together. I'll draw my stitching line on the back of the muslin pieces and then sew them in this order so that they are ready to be subcut. In sewing the strips for this block, especially if you're going to be hand sewing, we need to do things just a little bit more cautiously. When these sections of this strip are going to be cut, that's going to cause issues where the running stitch that I generally do would come apart way too easily on the ends. So what I'm going to be doing is doing a couple of running stitches. So I'm going to show you I've just done a couple of running stitches. And then after every 2, I'm going to do a back stitch. So I'm going to do a couple of running stitches and then a back stitch. And I'm going to do this all the way down my piece. And if I find that a section seems to be a little long, I can add in a few more back stitches. When you're stitching this by machine, you don't have to worry too much about the fabric falling apart quite as quickly because your stitches are generally much tighter and closer together than they are when you're doing hand stitching. So doing periodic back stitches will help to keep your fabric together after each stitch. So I'm going to continue to stitch all these seams, and then I will come back after they're all stitched together and then pressed. All 6 strips are sewn together and I've pressed them down, and when you press them, I've pressed all of my seams toward the darker fabric. Now I'm ready to subcut these, which means I'm going to be cutting these into 1 1/8 inch strips. So I should end up with 6 1 1/8 inch strips. Now here are my 6 strips, and I'm going to create my pattern by taking every other row and just turning them around. You see how easy it is to do this when I have an all-over pattern. Like I was saying a while ago, whoops, not that one. Let's get this bottom one. Like I was saying a while ago, if you have a pattern that has a definite direction, then this will look a little different. And if that doesn't bother you, that's fine. But if it does, then you'll have to have 2 different sections that you sew together and then cut into 3 strips and then intersperse them. So now I have these all cut and I'm ready to sew them all together in this order. All the rows are sewn together. I've pressed it really well and also trimmed it up. There wasn't much to trim, it was just making a few little threads even. So now this block is ready to have the outer borders sewn onto it. The borders are of the muslin or whatever you're using for your background fabric. This block trims up to 4¼ inches. So my strips are all going to be 3¼ inches of the muslin fabric. Do you have a correction on the sizes for the strips that you need? So I've cut all of these at 1 inch wide. The shorter ones are still going to be 4¼ inches, and that will line up with the blocks. And then these I just cut at 6½ inches long because that's what my ruler was. I will be trimming those down after I sew them onto the block. I stitched all the borders onto this block and was able to trim it. I trimmed maybe about 1/8 inch around all sides. And now this block is finished. I hope you enjoyed this walkthrough of block K2 from the Dear Jane quilt. It's also called Grandpa's Chickens. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a like. You can also subscribe to my channel and click that notification bell, and you'll be notified every time I upload a video, which is every Monday. If you have any questions or comments, you can leave them down below, or you can send me an email at sewitseamscreations@outlook.com. This is Veronica with Sew It Seams, and I'll see you next time.